Welcome to Shooting Straight. LamonF.com. I'm Frank Miniature, the editor-in-chief. The editor is America's First Freedom. Today we're speaking with J.D. Longo, mayor of Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. J.D., I've looked at your resume a bit, and it's like a hero's journey from a young guy growing into a freedom lover. You served our nation. You served it overseas. You're now mayor of a small town in Pennsylvania. There's a lot more to your tale than that, but I'd like to begin in the beginning because I find it very interesting. People growing up with firearms and guns and understanding their freedom, and then taking that into the military. For example, I did a book with a gentleman, a Green Beret who was wounded in Afghanistan, who made the argument when he was training people to be Green Berets, that he was turning people into country boys. And those who came in as country boys who had shot firearms before and understood the platform, especially if they shot ARs before, it was much easier to train them. There might be some bad habits they have to take out, but their familiarity with firearms, with their freedom, the whole process with the forest, even with the woods, if they were hunters, made it so much easier for them to grow into their freedom, then become Green Berets and then go into the field as Green Berets. So I'm wondering, is that where you started? You started as a hunter in Pennsylvania or not?
So my story is pretty unique, Frank. I didn't really get a full taste or access or exposure to firearms until I joined Army Junior ROTC in high school. I did have hunters in my family, notably my grandfather. He was a hunter. But by the time I was old enough to really go out there to enjoy it with him, he had given up the hobby. Other than that, I knew that there were firearms in the home, and certainly my grandfather taught me, and my uncle as well. I know he owned firearms. They taught me to respect firearms. They were clear from the very beginning that they were tools and they were things that were, not toys, and things that we should respect. And they had their uses. They had their uses for hunting and for self-defense. Whenever I joined Army Junior ROTC, I joined their marksmanship team. And that's whenever I started to understand just how deeply ingrained marksmanship and the use of rifles and pistols just were in our history as Americans, and how resourceful one could be if they could only hope to hone in on that resourcefulness using a tool like that. And so through Army Junior RTC, I did spend time on the marksmanship team. And then I went to the United States Marine Corps, where I enlisted as an infantry rifleman. And of course, I got all sorts of exposure to firearms then. And I became an expert rifleman and learned to use many other weapon systems, which I still carried on into my hobbies today. I love to get to the range and shoot, and I do enjoy going hunting.
Right in the beginning, what did they have you shooting at the Junior ROTC?
Yes, sir. In Junior ROTC, at first we had pellet guns and we had air rifles as well. And then because of my exposure to people in that program, I was then invited to go to the homes of friends where we would then go on the range with experienced folks and marksmanship instructors who would teach us how to fire. In fact, one of my oldest and best friends from high school, his father not only was a first sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, but he ended up becoming a licensed FFL. And that proved to be a very interesting friendship for me, because anytime I went over to their place, I knew that I was going to get to play with some really great firearms, and I really enjoyed learning to shoot with them. Of course, as I graduated into the Marine Corps, I started to shoot the M16A4 service rifle. I shot 50 caliber machine guns. I shot, the automatic grenade launcher Mark 19. So got so much great exposure, and I'm grateful for it.
Did you join the Marine Corps right after high school?
I did. I was 17 years old whenever I was a senior in high school. In fact, I completed all of my requirements for graduation a few weeks early, and I had to get everybody to sign off on it. But I left high school having completed all of my graduation requirements at 17 years old to go to Paris Island, South Carolina, where I would turn 18. And it was during that time that I got a full taste of all of this. And gosh, what an experience it was to join the Marine Corps, to serve my country, and to make lasting friendships and join a brotherhood that still is very near and dear to me.
I like going through these steps because I don't think we hold up our young heroes enough. And I would call you young at 35. I think an 18-year-old would think 35 is old, but you're really early on your journey here. And I think that kind of role model for the young, as they grow up, it is a big deal. It's important that we talk about it, and your connections to freedom, because then you took freedom's tool to Afghanistan to serve your nation over there. how long were you in the Marine Corps, and what role did you play over there?
Sure. So I spent 6 years in the United States Marine Corps on and off in the reserves as well. I did spend a lot of time on active duty. Most notably was my time in Afghanistan, where from September 2010 to March of 2011, I served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in the global war on terror as an infantry rifleman. We did conduct plenty of presence patrols. We did some combat operations, of course. But the thing that I enjoyed the most was trying to be the ambassador of goodwill and the protector of the downtrodden, the disenfranchised there, who looked to us as heroes that were going to protect them from the tyrannical Taliban, who, of course, imposed all sorts of ridiculous and crazy draconian rules that you and I could never imagine here in the United States.
So I'm curious, you're then at a pretty rural base in Afghanistan during a time of war, dealing with the Taliban. Were there snipers? What kind of conflict were you dealing with? You went into a local village. Were you worried about there being bad guys in the village and you had to interact with them? What was going on?
So there was definitely a sniper presence. We always had intelligence coming in telling us to be wary. It was commonplace that the fighters of the Taliban were so cowardly that they knew that they couldn't stand toe to toe with Marines. And so they liked to take pop shots, and they got to be, some of them, very good marksmen. Most memorable of them, though, was one in particular who was said to have been a Chechen sniper who was brought there specifically for the purpose of picking off American servicemen and any of the Afghan allies that we worked with, because we did work closely with the Afghan National Police and the Afghan Army, who were often in tow with us wherever we would go, in an effort to try to put them in the front of the people so that they too could be seen as trusted allies to the people who were trying to get out from under the tyrannical thumb of the Taliban. But aside from that, the issue that we ran into most often was just trying to travel. It was incredible the way that these individuals were able to set in improvised explosive devices and anti-personnel mines and anti-vehicle mines, which slowed down our travel so considerably that it wasn't uncommon for us to take 7 or 8 hours just to travel perhaps maybe 10 to 12 miles. And that was because you would just come onto bomb after bomb after bomb, using all of the great tools that we had. But luckily, we were tasked with many great EOD personnel who were able to help us identify and neutralize a lot of those threats. But past that, it was a lot of subversive actions that were taken on the part of the Taliban. And so that's why it was so important, as our superiors told us, that we were being ambassadors of goodwill at that time. So although I was part of a quick reaction force that was meant to react quickly to hostilities, we also got to do some really incredible things. We escorted we helped to provide security for children who were going to school. We would oftentimes help to protect convoys that were bringing things like school supplies or fertilizer or food or even medical equipment to places in impoverished Afghanistan, and we were going to be the medium through which they were going to be able to enjoy a little bit of the luxuries that you and I enjoy as Americans. But of course, at the end of the day, our main mission was to make sure that the enemy knew that we were there in case they wanted to play stupid games, so that we could award them stupid prizes.
Wow. Well, it must just drive you crazy to see what Biden did as he pulled out, and what he did to those people, and what he did by leaving that many of our firearms, our tanks, our planes, and so on there on the ground in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. And let me start with saying this. If any of us, a soldier, a sailor, Marine, an airman, were to have left one weapon behind in Afghanistan, or God forbid you had misplaced it for 1 second, believe me when I tell you that you would have been ran through the ringer, and it's quite possible that your career in the United States military might have been ruined. So the fact that they left trillions of dollars worth of equipment behind for our enemies to use, including all of these firearms, who we know, of course, are going to be turned against us and against our allies in the region, and will be used to undermine our interest in the region, just really hurts me. But nothing hurts more than the idea of all of the sacrifices that were made by the American men and women of our uniformed armed forces, whose sacrifice was almost in vain because of the mismanagement of the pullout of Afghanistan. And the thing that really sticks with me more than anything, Frank, is the opportunity I got to have to meet the parents of the Marines and sailors who died at Abbey Gate in Afghanistan during the botched pullout. And, I had already known what the stories were, but getting to meet them firsthand and look them in the eye and see the hurt in their eye because of the betrayal from the Biden-Harris regime really touched me in a bad way. And it's one of the few times I can tell you where I was really brought to an emotional state. But I think it's really important that despite all of that we're making sure that we're telling those people and all of the many people who served in Afghanistan and Iraq that their service was not in vain, because at the end of the day, we did exactly what it was that we were tasked with doing, and we were ambassadors of goodwill. We were great representatives of the freedoms and the liberties that we enjoy that are going to continue to inspire and instill a sense of hope in generations of Afghans and Iraqis who see how you and I live and who want to enjoy the things that we enjoy.
I don't think the struggle for freedom is ever in vain. We may win, we may lose, fall backward, but I don't feel like it's in vain. Good things come out of it. So then you come home. Well, let me mention this first. It was very heartening to hear President Donald Trump mention that they'd caught the lead terrorist in that attack in his speech.
Right.
And I jumped off the couch. I imagine you did the same thing.
I certainly did. I jumped up in excitement, but what really upset me, Frank, and I just couldn't believe it. And then again, I'm almost not even surprised, was the fact that not one of the Democrats on the opposition decided that that was something worth standing up and clapping for. And I just think to myself, no matter what your disagreements are with the president or with the Republican Party, surely we can all agree as Americans united under our Star-Spangled Banner that that was a good thing, that somebody would be brought to justice who ended the life of an American, our brother, and shame on them for doing that.
Well, if it took President Trump and his administration, about 6 weeks since he's been in office, until we're talking now, to get this guy, it just makes you wonder, was the Biden administration even trying? Right.
Sure, and I highly doubt they were. I think that the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris regime, as I like to call it, was so intent on washing their hands of Afghanistan and putting it behind them because they knew that they had royally screwed up. And so why would they want to continue to tear the Band-Aid off of that wound? But we are grateful to President Trump and to his administration for leading by example and for making sure that justice is served for Americans and that you and I are served and well represented.
So the Biden administration armed the Taliban, tried and did all they could to disarm the law-abiding American citizen. You come home after carrying arms overseas, and you decide to run for mayor. What led to that?
It's a really interesting thing, Frank. Anybody can tell you who owns property that when you start paying property taxes, you really start paying attention to the things that your local government and your school board are doing. And so whenever I came home from Afghanistan, I decided to put a down payment on a house in downtown Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, and enroll in school at Slippery Rock University, where I would go on to earn a bachelor's in history and a master's in education. It was during my time as a graduate student earning that master's in education that I realized that my property taxes had been raised twice, almost 20% in just a short 5-year period. And that was absurd to me because I was looking at the state of our roads. They were in shambles, our sidewalks in shambles. We didn't have a 24/7 police department, and you couldn't get anyone on the phone at the borough office if you ever needed anything. And so I thought to myself, why is it that we're paying these exorbitant taxes if our constituent services aren't matching up? And then I started to dive into it, Frank, and I realized what was happening was we did have, unfortunately, a Democrat-controlled council that was a very big fan of taxing and spending. And so what they had done was they had taken almost $1 million in debt against things like taking off tax earning and job creating real estate in our central C1 commercially zoned downtown business district in order to create even more green space in a place where we already had almost 100 acres of green space. Then I started to learn exactly who these folks were. As I dived a little deeper, I realized that their left-leaning tendencies also was starting to spill over into the culture war. And so these individuals were very much a part of trying to increase a police state, trying to diminish the liberties of you and I as American citizens and taxpayers. And that, unfortunately, also would be extended into their ideas about how guns and gun control should be met. And so, of course, that was a big no-no for me. So what started off as a fight to try to restore us and our financial stability as what was the second highest tax municipality at the time in my county. I'm glad to say, by the way, that we haven't raised property taxes in 7 years since I took office. Also started to turn into a necessity to fight the culture wars, which I understand many say aren't necessary and we shouldn't be spending time on. But Frank, I got to tell you, I think that the culture wars are just as important as the other fights that we're taking on, because we do have a very real threat right now of losing our liberties, and none more than our cherished Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms is on the chopping block whenever it comes to these leftists.
Right. If we lose our First Amendment right to the speech, which was happening in a lot of social media platforms, especially before Elon Musk took over Twitter, made it into X. Yeah, we'll lose everything else. Every other right begins to be diminished when you lose that ability to advocate for your freedom, as we're doing right now. But it also amazes me listening to you. The Second Amendment is such a keystone issue that when you meet someone who's pro-freedom, pro-Second Amendment, they tend to be good across many other areas of their politics. They tend to be conservative with our money and so on. But have you found that to be true? And how did that shape you? Your belief in that freedom, using your freedom, how did that shape you?
I think you're absolutely right in that assumption, sir. And I definitely have witnessed that myself. And I think it's because, Frank, whenever you take a look at who you and I are, in the believers and the protectors and the defenders of the Second Amendment, it oftentimes means that we are the protectors and defenders of the Constitution. You know, time and again, I hear people on the left side of the aisle say that the Constitution is a living, breathing document that can just change at any time. It's fluid. Or I've even heard extremists say that the Constitution was written by some old white men over a century ago, and so therefore it's totally outdated, and therefore it needs to be scrapped, and we need an entirely new document. And to that I say baloney. But what I'm trying to say here, Frank, is that if you and I respect the Second Amendment of the Constitution, it means that we actually hold dear, and in fact, we hold sacred and holy the amendments in the Constitution, especially those first 10 in our Bill of Rights. And that's something that I found that people on the left side of the aisle don't cherish and don't respect. And that is evident in their voting record.
Well said. And then we were speaking previously, and you mentioned that Butler, which is, of course, where Trump, what happened there. You'd gotten to meet President Trump while he was running for office the second time. And tell us about that event. Tell us what meeting him was like, and were you there for that horrific day?
I was there that day, Frank. I've had many opportunities. I've been very blessed to help in the campaigns of the president, both in 2020, but none more than in the 2024 cycle, where I got to speak on quite a few stages and serve as a surrogate for the Trump campaign, and even went on to become an elector for President Trump and Vice President Vance in Pennsylvania's 60th Commonwealth Electoral College, which was a great honor. That day, July 13th, 2024, in Butler, Pennsylvania, less than 20 miles away from my home of Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, which is also in Butler County, was supposed to have been a very special day. I was asked to give a few remarks and to lead that rally in our most honored Pledge of Allegiance, which is one of my favorite things to do as a veteran and as a proud American. After speaking and taking the stage, I was escorted backstage with my wife, who, by the way, was only 9 weeks pregnant at the time, with our first child, a daughter who we just delivered on February 7th. And we got to speak with the president and have a good conversation with him. He asked me a couple of things. He asked me, how things have been since we last saw each other in Butler in 2020. He asked me what the word was on the ground and how I thought we were doing in Pennsylvania and how I thought he was doing. And I told him, Mr. President, we're working very hard for you, sir, and Butler County is going to deliver Pennsylvania for you again so that we can get you back to the White House so that you can get back to the business of defending us. 20 minutes later, he takes the stage and he walks up to his podium, and, this awful lunatic decided to do violence against him and against us and the rally goers that were there to support him, that were there to hear a message of hope and inspiration that was stolen from them. And unfortunately, Mr. Compertor, hero firefighter Corey Compertor, was seated about 15 feet to our 6 o'clock directly behind us as the lunatic, the would-be assassin, was about 150 feet to our 6 o'clock directly behind us. Unfortunately, had to go right through Mr. Compertor and us to get to the president, and he saw fit to do that. But I will tell you, the thing that stood out to me the most about that day, despite the horror and the awful sadness of that situation, were two things. One, of course, is President Trump's resolve. He showed in that moment that he's the leader that this nation needs and that we want and that we were desperate to have back. He stood up. I saw him raise his fists in defiance of that moment to let us all know that he was safe and that he wasn't going to stop. And then, of course, he said those fabled words, fight, 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 in that moment. And it was just an incredible piece of history to witness firsthand. Again, just a few feet in front of my own eyes. It was at that time that I knew that not only was President Trump the leader that I thought he was, but he was going to be the president of the United States again, because I knew that he would stop at nothing to make sure that we achieved victory so that he could get back to where he needed to be to do the righteous work and continue the mission. The other thing that stood out to me, Frank, was the fact that nobody in the crowd seemed to panic at all. It was almost as if there was no fear. A lot of it was shock, of course, I understand that, but if it weren't for President Trump's resolve and him showing himself to be that strong leader with that iron fortitude, I think that any other event like that and any other scenario like that could have devolved into chaos. But he showed us in that moment that we had to be strong with him. And there were no riots. There was no running or stampeding. It was just a communal understanding that we were a family and we were in it together. And now more than ever, we were behind the president.
You can't fake that kind of reaction. That's his character. That's who he is. That in that
Absolutely.
kind of moment, you can't plan that. You can't take a moment and think about it. That he reacted, and he reacted with strength to evil's face. But
Absolutely.
it's still astounding. Have you been interviewed by Secret Service or other law enforcement agencies, FBI, on what you saw there and what happened?
I wasn't interviewed by any law enforcement agency, Frank, which at first I thought was quite surprising because I was an eyewitness. I was there all day. I participated in multiple levels in that event. I spent a lot of time backstage, of course, in the security area. But the more I looked into it and the more I thought on why it was I wasn't interviewed, I realized that I was one of thousands of individuals who had witnessed that. And luckily, because my wife and family, by the way, again, I just want to make it clear that my pregnant wife, 9 weeks pregnant, she's seated with me, my mother, my sister, my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, all there for the same reason. We were just a small group or a small drop in a bucket of thousands who were witness to that day. And luckily, all of us were spared in that moment. And we're eternally grateful for that. But when I thought more about why nobody had spoken to me, I realized I'm not a law enforcement officer. I wasn't in charge of or at all in coordination with anybody in authority on the security of that event. And I was, just a participant who was there to support the president, much like anybody else.
Well, I asked that question because not enough has come out about who that individual was, how he got on that roof, how that whole thing went down. I mean, you served and have shot and you know your way around a firearm, especially that platform. That's an easy shot.
It certainly
I can
was.
say the same thing.
It was incredible
should-
to see. I went back a few days later, Frank, because I went to the RNC immediately following that rally. And upon my return to Butler, I went back to the farm show where I helped give a tour of the grounds in the area to a congressional delegation, as I was an eyewitness there. And we did go back to the building. We went and saw the roof. We went on the roof. And I can tell you the idea that the incline or the decline of that roof was too steep for an agent to be put on top of was just absurd. Standing on it, I realized that it was virtually flat, but it was just enough decline that did provide a little bit of cover and concealment. But yes, we have those questions, Frank, and I'm still concerned that the Secret Service at the time didn't see fit to share any more information with the American public. And so I'm hopeful that right now, under the Trump administration and under the leadership of our Attorney General Pam Bondi, and under Kash Patel, our FBI director, and then, of course, under the new Secret Service director, who, by the way, was one of the Secret Service agents that was there that day. In fact, you can see him in that very famous picture of the president. I'm hopeful that those individuals will come together to make sure that the American public and President Trump, more than anybody, is given the full picture and told the truth about what happened that day, because frankly, we deserve to know.
Well, I'm sure they will. I have a lot of confidence in this team. Um, I just that event has been used by some on the gun control side as an excuse for more gun control, and taking away freedom when law enforcement in that particular instance do not do their job. It's of course it's very bothersome to people like you and me who understand their freedom.
And I think it's really amazing, Frank, for anybody who would say this is a perfect example of why we need any more gun control, I would point to the individuals who were there that day. I would point to the victims. I have not heard anybody who was there that day at that rally, certainly nobody in my family, and even the Comprador family, who arguably was affected more negatively than anybody by the events of that day, calling for gun control. In fact, President Trump, who was the victim or the target of that assassination attempt, he himself hasn't called for any other restraints or restrictions on firearms and on our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And so that should speak volumes to everybody, to the world, and to all Americans that we do cherish our Second Amendment right. And, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who said something akin to, if you're willing to give up any protection, then you're not really entitled to any liberty. Or in other words, if you're willing to give up some of your most fundamental freedoms just for the hope or the promise of a little bit of protection, then we're not deserving of any. And I couldn't agree any more with that feeling.
You'll lose it if you start down that slope. And President Trump and his administration, all signs are he's incredible what he's doing for our freedom. So going forward, with the last question here, how do you see freedom in Pennsylvania and in your mission and what you're doing? Are you hopeful? What do you see forward?
I'll tell you, Frank, I'm more hopeful now than ever. After the momentum that we gained in 2024 in getting President Trump and Vice President Vance to Washington to lead this country in the right direction, seeing Pennsylvania, which has traditionally been a blue swing state that is very vital to the success of Democrats on a national level, turn ruby red in many places, especially in places like Butler County, and seeing the voter registration numbers of Democrats dwindling across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I'm more hopeful now than ever. And I can tell you, I think that seeing President Trump in action, seeing his administration, and seeing our many Republican and conservative leaders who are operating on not just the federal level, but also on the state level, who include our state row officers, who, by the way, are all Republicans. I'll mention our treasurer, our attorney general, our auditor are all Republicans. The first time in Pennsylvania's history where all of those row offices are held by Republicans, who are arguably much more conservative than the typical liberal Democrat that you'd see in those offices. It gives me a lot of hope. And then, of course, you get to look at our state legislature. We do have a Republican-controlled Senate. We only have a very, very small disadvantage in the state house. I'm hopeful that here very soon we will enjoy a majority again in the state house. And then you take a look at local level politics. You look at offices like mine, your council members, your township commissioners, your school boards. What I'm seeing is a resounding no, a disagreement with, and a total blockage of any of the lunacy that you see from the radical left, because Pennsylvanians have time and again seen that what it is that they're trying to sell to us is harmful to us. Our dollar is hurting. They're trying to take away our fundamental rights. And again, none more than our right to keep and bear arms, as is guaranteed to us, not just by the Second Amendment of the Constitution, but also by the Pennsylvania Constitution, which I love takes it a step further than the federal Constitution. Our Second Amendment and to the Constitution says shall not be infringed, but Pennsylvania's Constitution says shall not be questioned. And what better way to let the government know that they are not to in any way think for 1 second that they can get away with infringing upon our individual rights and liberties than that language. And Pennsylvanians are starting to accept and honor that kind of language and telling their government enough is enough.
Well, very well said. Thank you for your service, of course, in the U.S. Marine Corps, but also in public service there in state and local politics in Pennsylvania. And I'll certainly be watching. I bet you a lot of members of the NRA will, as you go through your future and your endeavors.
Thank you very much, Frank. It was a great pleasure being here with you. And I wish you all the best in your work and with the NRA. Thank you for your righteous mission and your cause in defending our right to keep and bear arms.